ใช่
สงบเหมือนว่า
คือถ้า
วันนี้
วันเนี้ย
คนไทเกอร์อะไรอย่างเงี้ย
แล้วมันจะไม่มีแรงลากนะไม่มีแรงลากให้ยาวไปกว่านี้แบบไม่ถึงอยู่นานวันข้ามวันข้ามคืนเพราะถ้าเราดูไม่ว่าจะเป็นกปปสหรือว่าพันธมิตรเนี่ยกลุ่มที่ลากได้เนี่ยคือต้องเป็นแบบพวกอโศกคือยก
ต้องมีคนอยู่
หมู่บ้านมาเล
ต้อง
ย
มีตัวยื
อะไรอย่างเงี้ยต้อง
นประมาณนั้น
มีคนอยู่ใช่ใช่ใช่
โอ้น่าสนใจก็ไม่ต้อ
แล้วก็
งรู้สีโอเค
ถ้า
ค่ะ
มีการโหวตวันนี้เดาล้วนๆเลยนะคือถ้ามันมีการโหวตเนี่ยพวกสื่อพวกในโซเชียลเนี่ยเขาก็พร้อมใช่ไหมเนติเซนทั้งหลายก็พร้อมที่จะเอารูปคนปูนความเชื่อมโยงอะไรอย่างเงี้ยแบบ
เริ่มเลยไหมครับ
เริ่มเลยได้ค่ะแค่สงสัยว่าในซูมยังไม่ค่อยเห็นผู้เข้าร่วมแต่ว่าจะปล่อยสัญญาณไลฟ์ Facebook เลยใช่ไหมคะได้
ครั
ค่ะ
บผมจะเข้าที่พี่ยุ้ยเลยครับ
เดี๋ยวขออีกสัก2 นาทีดีไหมคะ
โอเคได้ครับ
เพราะว่าโอเค เริ่มเห็นแล้วค่ะเห็นโอเคท่านที่เข้ามาทางซูมได้ยินเสียงชัดใช่ไหมคะ
on both channels through Zoom and for those who register, and then for those at Facebook Live. So today it's a webinar for about 90 minutes on the updates of business and human rights situation in Myanmar. And there's the two organizations hosting this event together, which is Fair Finance Thailand and Myanmar Center for Responsible Business. So the event today is conducted bilingually.
So welcome to the webinar on the business and human rights situation update, July 2023. So it's a situation update in Myanmar, and we're very grateful to have two very prominent scholars and experts in Myanmar with us today. So for those of you who join via Zoom, please press the interpretation button if you would like to hear translation in English, because the event, almost all of it will be conducted in Thai, except for Kun Vicky's speech, which will be in English. For those who are joining us via a Facebook Live link, there will be two Facebook links. So one would be the Thai channel, and the other one would be English channel. So you could choose whichever link that you prefer if you are joining us from our Facebook page นะคะก็ขออนุญาตดำเนินรายการทั้งหมดต่อไปนี้เป็นภาษาไทย
So from now on, we're going to conduct the event in Thai. So to give a little bit of background of the event today, the Fair Finance Thailand is an organization that consists of 5 organizations to promote sustainable banking in Thailand. Our main job is to review sustainabilities of the bank's policies that open to public. And this is our 6th year. And in the past 2 years, so about 2 years ago, we have made a public letter to 3 banks and 9 Thai conglomerates that have invested in Myanmar after the coup d'etat for them to not violate human rights in Myanmar. The reason that we choose these 12 companies, because besides they having operations in Myanmar, they also are the organization who declare that they will follow the human rights policies. Fair Finance Thailand have found that banking has paid more attention to human rights, and today we have at least 6 banks who follow the UN guiding principles that focuses on business and human rights. So after that open letter, we have did a campaign in org, and so those who interested can join org and then sign the names. So today I think it's the right time, and also after the election, in Thailand, and it's the election that many people hope to see changes in foreign policies, including our neighboring countries like Myanmar. So I think the event today is very timely to talk about the business and human rights situation in Myanmar. So anyone who have questions, you can leave the questions in the box, and then the coordinators will pass those questions to the moderators. And for those watching on Facebook Live, you can type your questions on the comment under the Facebook Live as well as your preferred language, and then we'll pass on those questions to the moderators as well. So not to waste any time, we're going to hand over to Kun Kanika Gitti Wejkun, who is an MC on the radios 96.5 as well, to be an MC for today. So thank you very much, Kun Sarinee Achavanuntakul, who is a leader for Fair Finance Thailand. Today, I think it's very interesting that they choose today to host the event because so today is a day that the Senate or the member of parliament will vote for prime ministers. I think in the latest election for Thailand, gained a lot of interest from Asian countries, including Myanmar. And of course, the Myanmar government, the military-led Myanmar government, pay even more attention to this election of Thailand, because as we saw that the leader from the military party actually criticized Kun Pita, or the elected prime minister, as
Recording in
much
progress.
as other senates in the parliament. So since Myanmar has the coup d'etat from the 1st of February 2021, Thailand has unofficially visited the leaders of Myanmar many times. And the latest, there is a news that said that the leaders of Thailand has met with Aung San Suu Kyi, but we weren't sure if the leaders met with NUG. So today we're gonna look at the business and how much they pay attention to human rights situation in Myanmar. So today we are honored from two speakers, Dr. Lalita Hanwong, who is at the Department of History in Kasetsart University. And then another speaker, we are honored by Ms. Vicky Bowman, who is the director for Myanmar Center for Responsible Business, or MCRB, which is an organization that co-hosts with Fair Finance today. Kun Vicky is going to give an update about the business in situations in Myanmar today. But we're going to begin by Professor Lalita first. And what do we expect to see about the situation in Myanmar? Or also, I also want to pose the questions after the election of Thailand. Would there be any change or any impact on Myanmar situation? So hello, everyone. I'm very excited today, not just because I'm a speaker today, but I'm also excited, just like people in this country, that this is the same day with the vote for our Prime Minister. I have to say first that I am a historian, so I don't really know about economics or finance in particular. I used to write researches and publish books about one Myanmar economist who is like a classic economist. But that's about the autobiography and his life that has to came out of Myanmar and stay at LSE. So what my topics today, it's more like an exchange of knowledge on the situations in Myanmar. So in Thai, I'm going to call Pama instead of Myanmar because Thai people are more familiar with it. And I'm going to go through points of the Myanmar situations where you who work in the economic sector should pay attention to. There are many topics that I like to discuss or like whisper to all of you to hear. So if you have any questions after this session, I am more than happy to reply to any questions. So the issues that we have to talk about today began at the 1st February 2021 or about the last 2 years. So that day on the morning, there was a coup d'etat, but I don't want you to think that because of the coup d'etat and suddenly the issue arises, but in fact, Myanmar always have an issue, not just that coup d'etat, but after they gain independence, after the Second World War, they always have issues. And this issue has been accumulating under the carpet, under the rug, an elephant in the room. And sometimes people see it, sometimes people don't. So I would like to emphasize that issues that I'm addressing today is not just an issue that happened after coup d'etat 2 years ago, but the violence or the scale were increased after 2021. So after the coup d'etat by the Myanmar military armed force, and then the SAC group or State Asset Administration Council, there is a resistance movement that's like quite dynamic and diverse. But the ones I'm giving examples today are groups that locate in the city that call civil disobedience movement, and you will always see them be called as CDM. We call them civil disobedience movement. If you see Kanti in the past in India, it's the same concept and idea. But the scale for civil disobedience in Myanmar is rather large. Also, they established the NUG or the National Unity Government of Myanmar. But NUG is just not the only group of the only person who manage or try to lobby like foreign countries or lobby with international organizations or US government or EU governments for them to sanction and blacklist the companies or people who involved in the military. There are other organizations as well, which we're going to mention. There's another group that we call NUCC, which is close to NUG. But when I talk to the Myanmar activists, they would say that the NUG and the NUCC have their differences on their ideas and beliefs and the many elements. They also have the armed organizations, which called PDF or People Defense Force, and this PDF is separated from NUG. So in Myanmar, the ethnic organization, they would have like two wings. The first wing they call political wings, and then the other wing is the armed wings. So you might be familiar with the movement of the current ethnic group that we know as KNU, but KNU is political wings. And so the leaders would discuss peace, and there would be like a leader in issuing political policies and social policy, acting like government, Why at the same time KNU has their arm organization, which include a lot of arms people around the like Karen area. So ethnic groups in Myanmar follow this pattern. For example, like Kachin group, that they would have like the KA and they would have the political wings. So these are like patterns in ethnic groups in Myanmar, that they would have to have both sides, both like political sides and then the military sides, but they work together. So besides this PDF, it's people defense forces, right? So most are young people without experience in arms. They don't know how to use rifle. They don't know how to use bombs. A lot of people in PDF are actually professionals. They're like civil servants, the university students. They just regular office workers who are angry and they don't know what to do. Because if they keep protesting in the city, they would be cracked down by the military or by the police, as we've heard in the news, that we see how military like shoot people who join the protest. They use the sniper. So these people think the only way to fight with the military government is to leave the city and to join the ethnic armed force, and they want to be trained by the ethnic armed force. So what we can say is that PDF is not a professional military force, but with the help from the EAOs or ethnic armed organization, it helps PDF to become stronger in some areas. So PDF and nowadays have about like more than 10 groups, but the issue is that each group, they don't have to each group doesn't have to agree, because there are always news coming from Myanmar that one group use a method of like assassination of important person in the military, or like the person in a family. But then another group would denounce the action of the other group, that they should not use violence against people who are not directly involved, like family. So what I think now is that PDF's number, it keeps growing. So in just 2 years, they can grow into a large number of forces, and they don't have consensus. How would they like go about their operation? And the biggest leader of PDF does not really exist. It's not like Ho Chi Minh. There's no like Sugarner or Aung San Suu Kyi. So this group, I think, lack unity, and they often fight. There are always news coming. The important enemy of PDF, NUG, and civil disobedience movement is the SACs and the military force. And sometimes we call them the military arm as Tatmadaw. In central Myanmar and in the northern Myanmar, and then in some ethnic area, there are news that sometimes the PDF win, and they can chase Tatmadaw away, especially like in Sky, Mandalay. First, especially like in Mandalay, where they think that this is such a stronghold of the PDF. But in many areas, the Tatmadaw still takes control. So the goals of these both sides are to put an end to the war and conquer the entire country. Because if these wars keep going, the resources is being burned and they would not have enough resource. But I think in truth, each side face an issue with lack of resources, even though the Tatmadaw has more resources. But with the sanction, with boycotts, I think it's very hard for the Myanmar army to buy for Myanmar army to buy the weapons. It's very difficult. They can only order these weapons from a few countries. Weapons from Europe, weapons from the US would never comes in hand to Myanmar with the in an official way. So there are 3 points I want to address. First is that the fighting in Myanmar leads to an impact on citizens. So the fighting all over the country leads to a major crisis on refugee, especially on the east, which is close to Thai border. There are a lot of refugees who escaped the war into Thailand. And I think the number will keep growing in the future. The second point is that the technique of the current Myanmar army, they would use airstrike to win over the village that they know that this village give resources to the PDF. So they would just go to bomb that village. And this is why there are many refugees, and that is why there are innocent people get killed. And then the third point, so the fighting tends to be more violent, and this will definitely impact politics, economic, and society of Myanmar, both today and in the future. We have to admit that politics and economies are inseparable. So whenever that the politics of Myanmar cannot function, and SAC has to be blacklisted by European nations and the US, and many companies start to have awareness and recognition that doing business with the military army or the coup d'etat-led party or the crony who are involved with the coup d'etat are something that the Western country disagree with. So when you look at Myanmar from a citizen's lane, it seems that life can only get harder. There are many organizations like World Bank, and they assess that citizens from Myanmar who live in Myanmar, they will become poorer, twice as much in just 1 year. So this is the geography of Myanmar that relates to fighting. The area that has the most fighting, it's in center and going up a little bit up north. So we said this is the stronghold of the PDF, and they can conquer certain areas around here. Actually, most areas are around here. Not sure about the fact, but seems like that. But the area that would impact Thailand a lot would be at the east of Myanmar, at the Khaya, or the Red Current, and then Kayin, and then some in Mon, and some in Tanintari. You see that the fightings here are quite intense, and you see a lot of spots, fighting spots. Whenever the battles happen, there will be more refugees coming into Thailand, because it's in battles that happen in just a regular area where people live. Sometimes it's airstrike, sometimes it's a targeted attack at the village. there used to be a case where the Tatmadaw do the airstrike of the shirt of the Kachin during that time that they were celebrating that Christian event. There were a lot of like innocent people that lost their life from that airstrike. I'm not going to go into like all the details of what areas are important, but what I want to emphasize is that on this right-hand side are the areas that connect to Thailand's border. So whatever fightings that happen in Kaya, Kayin, and Morn and Tanintaria are somewhat sensitive to Thailand and will have significant impact to the economy and human rights situation in Thailand. A lot of people may wonder why the Shan here, and a lot of you might be familiar with Shan, and Shan is quite close to the northern culture of Thailand. The Shan also has its own armed force, but their armed force does not join PDF. So armed forces that join with PDF are Khayar and Kin and Morn. What's important to Thailand would be KNU or the Khayar or like Karani army. So all these will supply weapons to the PDF and give the training to the PDF. One of the phenomenons that take place, and I wish everyone to know about this, in Myanmar, there is a technique. I don't know if the word techniques actually suits it, but it actually impacts a lot of people's lives. There is a method for protest that we call nonviolence resistance, and it is a movement, and we call this CDM. So this CDM, in my opinion, is different from the protests in many countries. For example, if there's a crisis in Thailand, like for example, today there's no vote for Kun Pitha doesn't come prime minister. Tomorrow, do you think that civil servants, like doctors, like teachers, like bankers in Thailand, would they stop working and protest? The answer is no, right? So these things would not be in the mindset of Thailand that this is one way of the protest. But Myanmar, because they have a history of resistance of the, especially during the colonization period, and one of the way that they pressures authorities is that they would protest by not going to work. The scale is so large that the doctors, like teachers, nurses, many office workers, about 200,000 of them would stop working and do not work for the government or for like the private sector. They would go on strike. And they have not worked since the 1st of February of 2021. They don't get income. They were fired and they were blacklisted by the military group from Myanmar, and they've been blacklisted for 2 years. But the question is that these people, how do they survive? They live with their ideologies and dreams, but in fact, Myanmar has one significant features. They would have a lot of relatives that understand their ideologies and understand their ideas, and the NUG government asks for a donation from Myanmar abroad so that they get the money to help the CDM movement. Of course, it's not a lot of money. Some of the CDM join with the PDF, but this movement, imagine, so like working age population in the civil servants service and in like the private sector, about 200,000 people are missing. When we talk, I don't know much about the economy, but missing 200,000 working people, it's not easy. It's not a joke, right? Many people would say that, okay, they go to Myanmar, the department store still open, the business still thrive, but under the rug, there are so many things that are hidden. This is the reason why doing business with Myanmar is debatable and very controversial. So CDM, I explained that because they don't have an income and they were blacklisted, right, by the military-led government, they fired them from the occupation. So they have to pick up weapons with the ethnic groups. Not all of them, but some of them join, pick up the weapons and fight the coup. So the CDM movement has been very important historically with Myanmar, as I already explained. And I look at the colonization period. You would know that like students from Yangon universities, they would go on strike, not go to class because they want the rector of the university to quit. Or we have like workers who work at the port, they go on strike because they want to pressure their bosses. These cases always happen in Myanmar. And this is an important features of Myanmar. And as long as Myanmar in this kind of sensitive situation where they continue as a fighting or intense fighting between the military-led group and the people-led group, the chance that the political situation or economic situation or social situation to return to their normalcy is very difficult. So I'm going to move to another topic, the NUG that Kun Kanika has mentioned, which is National Unity Government. So they are the parallel government and they have ministers. But the name of the ministry of the NUG would be different from the NLD. They would have like the ministry that is different, like the Ministry of Federals, because the NUG and NUCC are trying to drive Myanmar into the federal states. And UCC is press even harder about these issues because they want Myanmar to be federal states country. If you think about Switzerland, if you think about like United States, where they have central government like at Washington D.C., but at the same time, you will see that each state has its own authority and they have the power to decide what kind of economics policy they want to have, what kind of political policies that they want to have. And so this resistance movement, besides trying to define the coup d'etat, they're also trying to promote the federal state government in the future. If the people win in the future, Myanmar will have a big change and they will become like the federal state. So I'm trying to be positive here, but whenever I talk to like activists, especially activists from ethnic groups, they would say to me that in the end, they think that NUG is like the second NLD. So NLD is the Aung San Suu Kyi's party, National League for Democracy. and we know them as NLD. The limitation of NLD is that they are a large party, and the one who has authorities to rule the party would be Buddhist Myanmar. So it's not strange that NLD represents a large group of people in the country and Buddhists who have their own agenda. But why they are the agendas from the ethnic groups that they try to voice them out, but under NLD, the voice of the ethnic groups kind of disappear because NUGs is actually like NLD and they only represents Myanmar. The biggest problem of Myanmar is the difference between ethnic groups. The ethnic group registered by government has like 135 ethnic groups. And this does not even include other groups that the government doesn't register. For example, right, Rohingya. And there are many groups that were overlooked by the government. So that's mean that a lot of ethnic groups in Myanmar. And in overlooking certain ethnic groups in Myanmar and in promoting like the real Myanmar, it make the NLD government get a lot of criticisms. If you remember the Rohingya case, that Aung San Suu Kyi was attacked severely from the human rights organization and from international organizations. So NUG is the parallel government, right? And I list the ministers. So some of them come from the ethnic groups, but most of them are still from the ONLD. And then some of them are activists. So in theory, NUG controls PDF, but I think in practice, actually PDF doesn't want to be controlled by NUG. Because in the end, as a historian, I understand facts through history, right? And I know that ethnic armed groups in current time, they grow because they have business. They have like those like gray business. So like historically, you will see that certain ethnic groups can grow because they have their own economic dependency. They can be self-sustained. They would have probably like gray business, and they would have their own agendas. They would have their own policies. As I said, that NUG is criticized as a second NLD that wants to protect like the purity of the party, and then they focusing on real Myanmar. But then we have another group that we call NUCC. So these NUCCs was established at the same time with NUG, and they provide advice. If you see the list of people in there, they're quite diverse. They're more diverse on ethnic groups. And they are less NLD, we can say that. And I talk to my friends who are activists and work on ethnic groups. They would say that NUCC, it's better for them in doing inclusive work, where they include ethnic groups in, and they would have the agenda of NLD, less agendas of NLD. So one of the factors or like one of the agents actually that controls the direction of Myanmar is the Myanmar army. So Myanmar army, it's a group of people that lives in another universe compared to us. What I mean is that they would think in a certain way. They would only have the language that only the people in the army would understand. So like Myanmar was going very well, right? They get investments from foreign countries. The economy was growing, and then they have the coup d'état. But if you ask around people why we have a coup d'état, why suddenly the leaders in the army wants to do the coup d'état, but you would not get a clear answer. But actually, it's the way they thought, how like Min Aung Hlaing think. In the end, that how Min Aung Hlaing thinks that if they allow the citizens led party to thrive, then it will lead to the division in the country, and then it will lower the status of the Myanmar army. That's why I'm saying they're in the different universe. And how like the weak point is that the Myanmar army does not talk to the NLD party or the citizens-led party. So I'm going to talk about the limitation of the economies in Myanmar, economic implication. The first one is that many group of people or companies that are blacklisted by Western governments, whether EU or whether US, like many large conglomerates that operate by army is being blacklisted. For example, like MEHL or MEC or like mining enterprise, number 1 and 2, are cronies like Utesa and their family. So the blacklist go directly to the daughter of Utesas. The second implications or limitation is that Myanmar would have decrease in working age population. As I said, 200,000 people are missing from the workforce, right? And they join the civil disobedience movement, and the ongoing protests make like many people missing from the system. In the long run, this will cause really a big issue. And then the third point is the currency devaluation. The Myanmar baht is never static. And then the problems and obstacle of Thailand among the conflict in Myanmar. I think that like there are many Thai conglomerates that operate in Myanmar. Don't know if I can mention them. One of them is PTT, CP, right? Thai banks that invest in Myanmar, especially like PTT, Chevron, after they were pressured by EU and US to actually withdraw from Myanmar. So what they do is that like PT like exploit the opportunity when US and EU company withdrew from Myanmar to expand their manufacturing base. But in doing that, they compensate by being pressured by human rights organization like us that pressure them to be aware that they could be possible subject to human rights violations. And then there are also sanctions from US or EU and many other countries that slow the economic growth in Myanmar. So the publicity of the companies could be impacted in the long run if people or the public know that they are involved with the blacklist. And then the third issue is the vitality of economy. I can tell you that the fighting will go on for a long time, and I don't know when the civil war will end. So this kind of situation impact the investment confidence and trust, right? And the financial policies of the coup d'etat-led government doesn't generate any income for the people in the near future. So this is my presentation. Thank you very much. So thank you, Ajahn Lalita, so much. I think Ajahn Lalita has given both like a wide overview of the Myanmar and then also some in-depth detail about Myanmar as well. I think many banks here would learn more about the details and they would understand more. Ajahn Lalita mentioned about that the fighting will not be over soon, and the sanctions, especially from the Western countries like EU or like US. So you may not do like business directly with the Myanmar coup d'etat, but it will impact your image later if they will discover that you are somehow involved. So now we're going to move on to Kun Vicky. We're going to move on to Kun Vicky Bowman, who is the director of Myanmar Center for Responsible Business, or MCRB, and she's going to discuss about the business and human rights in Myanmar. Kun Vicky, so if you're ready, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning from London. My name is Vicky Bowman. I am one of the co-hosts for this initiative with Fair Finance Thailand, with whom we've been in touch now for a couple of years. My presentation is going to focus on more on the economy and specifically on the advice that we are giving companies from all nationalities, both Western, Asian, and also Myanmar companies, around how to fulfill their obligations under the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which, as Kun Sarinee mentioned, I think she said 6 banks have already sort of actively noted publicly their commitment to that, and which feature within the Thai government's National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, and have also been taken up by the Securities and Exchange Commission of Thailand. So just a couple of words on MCRB. We've been active now for 10 years. We are a donor funded, mainly now funded by the UK government, but previously a range of European governments. We're a platform that has sought to bridge governments, and specifically prior to the coup, the Myanmar government, companies, both foreign investment and Myanmar, and civil society organizations, including trade unions and labor groups, for a discussion about how to make responsible business a reality. Unfortunately, approximately this time last year, I was arrested and detained for 3 months. And as a consequence of that, we decided to close down our Yangon office. But I am continuing to work part-time on this from London, and some former members of the team in Yangon are working with some of our partner organizations, such as the UNDP, Myanmar Business Coalition on Gender Equality, and some others who are engaged in different aspects of business and human rights. This includes also the EU's program on the garment sector, which is currently taking up a lot of our time. My background is both from government. I was a diplomat, also from business. I worked for a mining company, and in this context, working for an NGO. So I've worked across these different perspectives. What I want to begin by, because a lot of my presentation is going to be quite bleak and quite negative about the risks, but I do want to stress up front that MCRB is not encouraging businesses to quit Myanmar. We do not believe that sort of bringing the economy further to its knees, further than it already is suffering. We do not believe that putting people out of jobs will have any positive effect on bringing us back to a path of democracy and political solution in Myanmar. And in particular, we are very keen that the private sector should remain as a source of employment and income in Myanmar. But also from a Thai perspective, we see a very important role for businesses in Thailand as employers of Myanmar migrant labor, because for many Myanmar people nowadays, emigration either to Thailand, to Malaysia, Singapore, or the Gulf, or even further overseas, is one of the coping mechanisms that people are choosing. So we believe that the private sector has a very important role in helping people to survive this current current crisis. And this is also the view of groups inside Myanmar who are seeking to address abuses, for example, in the garment sector factories. So there's a quote on this slide from one of those activists who said, "We really want people to stay and fix the problems, not to leave." So just to set that in perspective, this slide is something I worked on about 18 months ago. Last time we did something with Sarinee, looking at which Thai companies are either registered with Myanmar Investment Commission or in some other way present in Myanmar. However, some of this has changed. I noted the other day, for example, that Myanmar Pongpipat, which had a very controversial tin mine in the south of Myanmar, claims that it is no longer active in that mine and therefore was removed from the Burma campaign's dirty list. I don't know whether that is true or not, because Pongpipat is a company with whom MCRB has found it over the years impossible to make any contact. But many of these other companies are still in some way present and have made important investments in the country. Above all, as we've mentioned, PTTEP, which is a hugely significant player and a growing one. And also your banks who feature here are very important in terms of linking the Myanmar private sector to the international economy. Perhaps what's more important to look at, though, is that trading relationship with between Thailand and Myanmar. And these statistics, I think, are interesting because they show both Thai exports to Myanmar, where the business and human rights implications relate to product stewardship. So effectively the downstream use of things which are sold, and probably the only one of particular importance here in the current climate is the whole question of aviation fuel, because I see that there are exports from Thailand of some sorts of fuels, may not be aviation fuel. So that is high on the agenda, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But I think that there are very few business and human rights risks per se attached to export of products to Myanmar. It's more the question of, for example, within distribution networks, how are companies managing safety of staff in a atmosphere of violent conflict throughout many areas of the country. Then looking at the import side, obviously the gas, which is produced by now the two PTT EP facilities, now that they've taken over the operatorship for Total's one, is super important in the relationship and very important for Thailand's own energy security. But I also just want to flag up the importance of cereals and fish products within the exports into Thailand, because these are products which either by themselves or in a derivative form could end up in global supply chains, whether it be questions around pet food, for example, or corn going into chicken feed or other products. So I do want you to encourage you to look at that question of the sustainability of imported products into Thailand. Corn is an area which I think globally is going to be of growing focus because of its role in some countries in terms of driving deforestation to plant maize. Why, from a regulatory perspective, are companies generally paying even more attention to Myanmar than they already were, which was also already for decades very much on compliance and lawyers' radar screens. So this is my summary of the current regulatory initiatives which could have an impact on Thai companies, including Thai banks. Some of these are still in progress, but most companies are preparing for them, such as, for example, the draft European Union Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, otherwise known as mandatory human rights due diligence, which will introduce obligations on companies above a certain size, yet to be defined, to demonstrate that they have done human rights due diligence, including in their supply chain. So that could affect either Thai companies with a significant presence in Europe or European companies which have a relationship with Thai companies, including Thai financial institutions. But there are others which already exist, and I've just selected a few of them. And I know that Thailand has already experienced a long dialogue with the European Union on issues such as fisheries products and working conditions in that supply chain. And then in addition to these regulatory initiatives and the sanctions that have been put into place on a few companies and a few individuals, which is definitely something which, as you're aware, is keeping you busy, and the Financial Action Task Force is decision to blacklist Myanmar, there's also the self-initiated investor alliance pressure, which we've seen since the coup from organizations such as the Investor Alliance for Human Rights, which brings together a very large or a number of very large pension firms from Europe and the USA. And there's another alliance initiative under EIRIS, EIRS, with a similar objective around having a discussion with investor relations teams and companies about how the company is managing its risk, its exposure related to Myanmar, particularly where it is linked to investments which have some sort of military connection. So either where there is a partnership with a military-owned company, or obviously arms trading and other sales of equipment to the military, or where there are products or projects in land-connected sectors such as industrial zones, mining, forestry, and so on. And then you have your own Thai initiatives, which are perhaps less regulatory, but incorporating requirements around disclosure of your human rights policies and your due diligence. So there's a number of different ways in which these initiatives are starting to hit you, as I'm sure you're aware, even if you're not physically present with an office in Myanmar. And this has real world effects, as we saw in December, where the Norwegian pension fund decided to exclude PTT and PTT Oil and Retail from its portfolio. And that has a wider knock-on effect on companies reputationally if they come on this list as excluded for their connections to Myanmar. Taking a look within Myanmar at the state of the private sector, it's already been covered a little bit by Kun Lalita, but these are some of the issues which companies are struggling with, and it's very much a survival mode for companies. The most significant challenges that are being faced, and again, as banks, you know this, relate to the banking sector, currency devaluations, exchange restrictions, and so on. But there are also very significant impacts due to energy shortages, which are only over the years, regardless of the political situation, going to increase in the foreseeable future. And then issues like internet connectivity with both state-imposed shutdowns, but also destruction of connectivity by opposition groups. And then wider issues around declining governance. And again, as Kun Lalita has mentioned, part of that is driven by a loss of officials from government services, including, for example, the environmental department, labor department. So many of these more socially and environmentally aware civil servants had participated in the civil disobedience movement, and those departments therefore lost staff who had been the beneficiaries of training over the last 10 years in how to run a modern regulatory structure, which therefore puts more onus on companies themselves to stay compliant, because it's unlikely that they're going to be checked by inspectors, because there are even fewer inspectors than there were before. The European Chamber of Commerce does a quarterly survey, and this is a short extract from their latest one, which concluded in June. So this ties up with what I was just saying, that banking issues are the issue reported as most challenging for all of the businesses in the country. But there are other issues that remain a challenge, although in some cases companies have sort of found the way to manage those risks, such as, for example, security. And power is definitely, and particularly in the last quarter, was a rising challenge, as it always is at the sort of March to May time of year because of the dry season. But nonetheless, the majority of the European companies who are members of Eurocham are continuing to stay, but they are operating to different degrees of business as usual or at reduced activity, depending on the sectors they're in and the challenges they face. Security, this is again something which Eurocham shares with its members and is produced by one of several security companies who are active in Yangon, and they have subscription services for companies, and it helps particularly, I think, with those companies who have a presence on the ground, including distribution networks. And you can see that the red areas are very much in the most recent months banked up against the Thai border along the southern part of Myanmar to Ninthari, less so in Shan, in some of the other border crossings. But this shows you some of the hotspots. The fact that Yangon is generally less of a hotspot, there is no active conflict, but there are still risks of improvised explosive devices by some opposition groups targeting in particular government facilities. So this puts the whole of Myanmar as a conflict affected and high risk area. And if you look on the global map of CARAs, prior to the coup, I think about 6 or 7 of the states and regions of Myanmar were identified as CARA. It's now all 15. So this has implications in legal terms for things like the conflict minerals regulation from the EU and US as well, where tin is an important commodity going into supply chains, including particularly into China, but also into Thailand as well. And being conflict affected requires, under the UN guiding principles, heightened due diligence. This slide shows why that's the case, the kind of things that a conflict exacerbates, and including the scale of the risks, the scope of the issues, the irremediability of abuses which may occur because they often lead to loss of life, and also increased vulnerability of certain populations. And heightened due diligence requires a company to very much bring an analysis of the conflict into its due diligence and look at the impact of the conflict on the business and of the business on the conflict. Looking at the impact of the business on the conflict, the first step should be to consider the company's exposure under international humanitarian law, which in a broad sense says that if companies remain neutral, then they should have the same protection as civilians. So a company needs to examine the risks of it either not being neutral or being perceived not to be neutral. And I've given a few examples there. I would highlight that a lot of these have not been tested in any court of law, so they should more be seen as risks that a company should avoid exposure to, rather than black and white examples of complicity in abuses. Aviation fuel is the one which is having the most focus because of the tactics of the Myanmar military in terms of a reliance on bombing villages as part of their anti-insurgency efforts and the civilian casualties that that's causing. So Amnesty International and a number of other groups have been looking at this, including which companies are still involved in the supply of aviation fuel to Myanmar. And just recently in one of their updates, they identified a Thai connection there from a shipment. So that's one particularly to watch out for. But there are others which may be less visible and less predictable, such as when we saw a couple of weeks ago a supplier to a European company had a labor dispute, and rather than settling that in a civilian-based way, both through dialogue with the trade union representatives, but also involving the labor office, instead the manager of that factory decided to call in his mates in the military to intimidate the workers. So that is obviously a red flag for any company, which they should have been pre-warning their suppliers was unacceptable behavior. So these are some of the risks that we see coming up, which we share with other companies so that they won't fall into the same trap. risks of payments, including again with logistics and distributions, has increased. And it's not just about payments to the military, but it's payments to non-state armed groups, which has led some companies simply to decide not to have a countrywide distribution network anymore. And obviously there's the question of safety and security of employees as well to take into account when considering how far you can continue to either truck goods or fix telecoms towers and so on. And then commercial partnerships with military entities, the most well-known example of that is Kirin Beer in a partnership with the sort of military-owned public company, UMEHL, which has led Kirin ultimately to leave. So different ways in which companies have been exposed, which all other companies should look at from the perspective of their own activities and portfolio. Conflict impacts on the business. Again, companies over the last 2 years have observed these kind of issues arising within their businesses. Some of the earlier issues that they face, such as, for example, their own staff wishing to strike or go into the CDM movement, by and large, those risks have now disappeared, because that was very much a 2021 thing, at least for the private sector. And those individuals who have decided they don't want to work in a bank have now left the bank. But in the early days, companies were giving staff quite a lot of flexibility around time off, either paid or unpaid, to go out and participate in demonstrations or whatever, when the height of the sort of opposition to the coup was there. So now the risks that we're seeing relate more to questions around security of employees, particularly when they're either coming to or from the office, but also where you've got, for example, government tax offices which are being targeted, and the risk of employees going there. Obviously, where services have moved online, that's one mitigation factor, or where staff can work from home as well. So each company will have a different exposure around that. The devaluation of the chat has, and particularly the fact that the legal minimum wage has not been increased for 5 years and is therefore worth about half of what it was when it was set in 2018, is a major risk for companies who have supply chains, garment sector, but also agriculture, because this is nowhere near, not even, I mean, it was never a living wage per se, but it's so far off it now, the minimum legal wage. And so companies need to be looking at wage levels and working out ways to lift them up, regardless of what the legal requirement is, because otherwise they do risk taking advantage of workers who are desperate for work of any kind. And then also the wider situation creates challenges for workers, for example, power cuts, which then have impacts on factory hours, on overtime. And then the uncertainty that's caused by, for example, in the garment sector, not knowing whether there will be any orders in the next season because of boycott campaigns or other reasons that buyers may stop buying. All of that then has a knock-on effect on workers, leading them to be more precarious on day wages and so on, which reduces their security and reduces standards of decent standards of work. I've mentioned freedom of association as being a risk. Again, companies have it in their ability to ensure that within their factory walls that freedom of association is respected. Some do, some don't. And in everything I'm saying, there are good practices and then there are poor practices that we observe. Other risks since the coup, some of which already existed previously, are things around land security and particularly in upland areas, the risk of land grabs where local customary users didn't have paperwork to demonstrate ownership. So this is increased further, particularly where you also have overlaid on that an increased number of internally displaced people. And then the more sort of social issues around polarization in workplaces can even lead to what was perhaps an employee dispute. And there was a case of a large multinational the other day where a security guard who was sacked for poor performance then managed to get 3 of his former colleagues arrested by showing his military brother their Facebook posts, and that was mainly a personal vendetta, where an individual was using the breakdown of rule of law to get revenge, and these all have impacts on staff mental welfare. So many companies have taken to providing support lines and other forms of counselling for staff, both individually and collectively. And a lot of this relates to use of social media, which can put employees at risk going to and from work, or as I gave in that case, where someone wants to get back at someone, but also the risk of recording by a company of things like CCTV. New risks have emerged from that, and I'm just going to give one example and some guidance from a risk assessment we published in February 2022, so one of our most recent works, which we published post-coup, where risks have emerged since the coup around, for example, a demonstration in a shopping centre where public security then demands to see the footage so that they can work out who to arrest. So companies can be inadvertently complicit in handing over that data, and that should lead companies to ask themselves, is it even worth recording things in the first place, or is that an exposure that we don't need? Others of these recommendations around CCTV are more generic to any situation, any country, and around good practice around privacy. A quick reminder of the fact that human rights due diligence isn't just about internal review, but it involves communication, very important, but also that it involves a focus on adverse impacts, and that can be the adverse impacts of staying and continuing business and how to manage those, but it's also a lens through which to look at the question of leaving if a company is considering that. So companies should look at the adverse impacts of leaving, for example, around loss of both direct employment and indirect employment. That is an adverse impact that should be assessed when a company makes its decision and communicates its decision about whether to stay or leave. So communication is very important, and I want to congratulate Kasetsart, because I think you are one of the few, if not the only, Thai bank that responded to the inquiry that Sarinee mentioned, and did publicly communicate its current stance on Myanmar back in July 2021, 6 months after the coup. So thank you for that, because that is a fundamental part of compliance with the UN guiding principles about knowing and showing. So the communication is very important, both as a means of being held accountable, but also, frankly, as a way of ensuring that the narrative is one which you believe is accurate, as opposed to having information gaps which could lead to misinformation, which could harm the company's reputation. So we are always encouraging companies to be transparent about their current activities and about how they are identifying and managing their risks, within, obviously, the wider question of not putting their own employees at risk. But we do believe it is possible to do that. Some companies have opted to leave since the coup, or definitely to sort of pause investments. Most of them have done this for commercial reasons. Some have done it for specific human rights reasons or sanctions reasons. But it is much easier if you are a loss-making enterprise to exit responsibly than it is if you're a profitable one, because nobody wants to swoop in and pick up a loss-making enterprise. So there's far less risk that the exit can then be hijacked by influential players, irresponsible companies, used as a sort of means of extracting some sort of rent-seeking, corruption payments, and so on. This was, I think, the reason that Total exited in the way it did, where it basically handed over its shares to the existing partners in the project, rather than going through a sales process which requires regulatory approval, which is what Chevron has been seeking to do. So it was a very active decision of minimizing the risk of intervention. Whereas Telenor, on the other hand, having a telecoms license was required to receive the regulator's approval. I don't think that they approached this very sensibly, in that the buyer that they selected, I think, was prima facie not going to be acceptable to a number of stakeholders, both inside the country and outside the country. And ultimately that ended up in a different buyer, which Telenor had not chosen, coming in. And indeed, although we know the superficial identity of that buyer, we don't necessarily know all the details about the shareholders. So having a clear sense of where the risks are in exit and having a clear exit strategy is something which companies should have, even if they're not planning to leave, and planning ahead and sort of thinking through all the different risks is a very important part of remaining. But where companies are leaving, obviously they should meet all legal obligations, but also look for how to go above and beyond that in terms of supporting staff and subcontractors, and protecting data. And also, for example, the case of BAT, tobacco company, who left, they destroyed their rag tobacco and mixed it up with soap, which apparently makes a very good fertilizer for teak trees, rather than letting it somehow go onto the open market. And I would say if companies do decide to leave, don't then suddenly wipe out Myanmar from your website, because that actually will remove the evidence that you've left. So maintain transparency about that exit if you do go. But if you're staying, then there are plenty of opportunities to communicate and engage still with in-country stakeholders and rights holders. It is more difficult perhaps, but it is not impossible. And this is something which MCRB still sort of maintains networks and suggestions for who to talk to. There are other ways that some companies are using to engage with workers in their supply chain. And again, this is not Myanmar specific, but there are various apps coming on the market which enable workers to be surveyed on a regular basis, and that's useful for tracking and to some extent for intervening. Communication is super important, as I've already mentioned, as is joining into joining with your peers, ideally through chambers of commerce, but also international multi-stakeholder initiatives to share understanding of risks and how to manage them. And then one final thing, a little bit off topic, but just because this is what brought us to Fair Finance Thailand, and Fair Finance Asia more broadly, is that for the last 8 years or so, we have been encouraging transparency within the Myanmar large companies based on structures or rubrics such as the ASEAN Corporate Governance Scorecard, which is used by the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum, to try to help local Myanmar companies raise their game around corporate governance and transparency. So our latest report, which was conducted post-coup, based on data in 2022, shows that the ones that have got the understanding of the need for transparency have continued to try to do better despite the difficulties in the crisis situation. There are many, many more companies we've looked at who are really have not yet sort of woken up and smelt the coffee. But we advocate that any Myanmar company that is continuing to operate needs to make sure that it's doing the right thing now, because down the track, if things get better in Myanmar and if foreign investors and banks and so on start to become more interested in the country again, they will be looking at this period and how companies performed and how companies acted and how they managed themselves and disclosed information during this period. So this is on our website if you want to take a look. And Kupkornaka, thank you very much, and do get in touch with me, including if you want a copy of this presentation.
ขอบคุณคุณวิกกี้โบแมนผู้อำนวยการของ MCRB
Thank you, Ms. Vicky Bowman, the director of MCRB. So as Kun Bowman has said, to actually withdraw all investment from Myanmar and sanctions might not be the only solutions, because it's the company itself, it's provide source of income for the people in the country, but you have to probably consider the human rights about the situation, about the human rights situation in Myanmar. And because right now everything is more transparent, right? So it's better for you to communicate and consider this if you consider to stay in Myanmar. So if you're watching this, whether through Zoom or Facebook Live, if you have any questions, you can just post the questions in. So after Professor Lalita listening to Miss Vicky, and you see, like, do you think that the Thai conglomerates can follow what Kun Vicky has said? That they can follow like the human rights guidance that Kun Vicky has mentioned? So as Kun Vicky said, since the beginning that the goals or the objectives in the end is for business from Thailand or whatever countries should think about withdrawing from Myanmar. Because in my case, my example, if I want to go to Myanmar, I have not visited Myanmar for a long time, but I have to think, like in visiting to Myanmar, there's a lot of fees that would incur, and then and those fees would go to the military group, and all the regulations after 2021 is issued by the coup d'etat. So for me to show that I do not support the coup d'etat is actually that I avoid going to Myanmar, and I choose to only contact with the people I know or my friends through other means. I understand that many business still has to operate in Myanmar or have to connect or contact with Myanmar. But in my opinion, I think to show your determination, to be honest, I'm not an expert on this topic. If my suggestions would be to avoid those who have business in Myanmar, you should keep your business sustained. But in doing business in Myanmar, but I think, in my opinion, I think doing business in Myanmar and avoiding the connection with the military personnel, I think is almost impossible. So for people who think about investing in Myanmar, I think you have to think twice. So, but Kun Lalita, so just like the politics in Thailand, before this, the coup d'etat party in Myanmar is afraid of like Move Forward party in Thailand, right? So if the Move Forward party in Thailand can establish its government, would the investment in Myanmar be not as scary? If you look at the relationship between Thai and Myanmar, military is still going well. Can business look at it this way? So business, if you look at income, I think Thailand has a lot of opportunity in Myanmar. As Kun Don Paramat Vinay, who's like Minister of Foreign Department of Thailand, is actually a leader of ASEAN countries, probably the only country in ASEAN that visit Myanmar as often as the leader can. This is probably about the same amount of visits with Raksagon in Cambodia. But in Thailand, there's an obvious hidden agenda. If you just talk about the investment number, I think Thailand has a lot of opportunity to invest in Myanmar because Myanmar has a lot of unexploited resources, had natural gases, and there's like gems, jewelries in Myanmar that's still unexploited. If you don't consider about human rights, of course, Thailand has a lot of opportunities to invest business in Myanmar. But if we talk about human rights and we talk about fair operation, but if we tell like our customer that we use resources from Myanmar, and your customer nowadays probably has an increasing awareness about not using products that comes from Myanmar or products that they feel that support the coup d'etat government to continue to rule. So if you talk about, fair operation in the long run, so considering investment in Myanmar, you have to be very careful, and you just not think about the money and the return, but you have to think about human rights as well.
ค่ะขอบคุณนะคะคุณโบแมนคะ
Could I come in on that?
ค่ะโอเคอยากจะให้นิดนึง
So-
นะคะอยากจะให้คุณวิกกี้เนี่ย
So, Kun Vicky, if you can
So-
give comment about this,
Sure.
and I also want to ask a question.
คุณวิกกี้
I
If
think it's very important. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
มีความหวังมากน้อยแค่ไหน
so, how hopeful are you
เอกชนไทย
to make like the Thai private organizations or like Thai banks
12 แห่งตอบแค่แห่งเดียวถึงเรื่องหลักการที่ด้านสิทธิมนุษยชน
to make Thai banks to follow more on the UN guiding principle, especially on Myanmar? How hopeful are you that the Thai banks will comply with this and with the human rights in doing business? And what do you think we should do to promote the Thai enterprise or Thai banks to comply more with the human rights guiding principle?
Thank you. So first of all, just on Kun Lalita's comments, I think it's really important not to generalize about all business. There is a big difference in the risks related to the gas production, in risks related to rubies, and in the production of chicken feed, for example, which obviously, CP is a major player. They have totally different risk profiles, and the ability of a company to manage its chicken feed factory responsibly is totally different to ruby mining. So one simply shouldn't tar all businesses with the same brush or say, doing business in Myanmar is a bad thing. You've got to be more specific and get each company looking at its assessing its risks and whether it can manage them. So I do want to reinforce this point that I don't think that it is helpful to encourage companies who are in the market to leave unless what they are doing is, itself somehow exploitative. It should not be a pressure on everyone to go, not least because the people who pick up the pieces of profitable businesses tend to be the ones who have connections. So we actually make it worse by encouraging the better companies and the companies in the lower risk activities to leave. Your question around Thai banks, I have to say that in the 10 years that MCRB has been working, we have found it very difficult to engage with Thai companies. We've tried, including through the Thai chamber, and had very little impact. That's one reason why I started talking to Fair Finance Thailand to see whether there were other routes. And what I have noticed from reading the sustainability reports of Thai companies is that they rarely mention Myanmar. They talk an awful good story about what they do in Thailand, but those that I know who are present in Myanmar are not communicating about it. So I do think there's a big communication gap that all Thai companies who have some sort of Myanmar connection should be stepping into. Again, Kazakhstan did do that, which is good, but we didn't see that from the other Thai companies that we know are present.
ค่ะงั้นทั้งสองท่านมีข้อแนะนำ
So, Professor Lalita and Kun Vicky, do you have any recommendations for the Thai civil societies or like for Thai consumers? Because as a consumers, if we can communicate back to the banks or to our companies to think about human rights in doing business in the neighboring country. So, Professor Lalita first. So, repeat the questions. So, do you have any suggestions to the civil society of consumers in Thailand to communicate or campaign with Thai banks or Thai business that invest in doing business in Myanmar for them to care more about human rights? I think human rights issue is part of the CSR that many companies has been working on. But if you talk about like Thai public, I think the human rights situation in Myanmar keeps getting worse. And in the past week, we have a case where there's a debate about refugees from war from Myanmar into Thailand. There's people who pose a question like why would Thai government help these refugees? Why do not send them back? Which I think because Thailand it's a location for Myanmar refugees for like over 10 years, and to make Thai society aware the importance of human rights that's not related to business or just politics. I think it's important to make Thai citizens aware of human rights, and for the business and for the Thai banks that will engage for them to have a campaign about human rights. I may not be able to give suggestions, but for the civil society, I often say that human rights is very close to us and close to our hearts. And as a human being, and with neighboring countries, whether not just Myanmar, Laos, or Cambodia, what we should have is that empathy for our neighboring countries and people in those countries. And we should look at refugees or human rights crisis in the neighboring country is not far from our concern. We might not see the economic sector of Thailand mentions this issue so much. Like today, we talk about investment in Myanmar, right? And whether like what kind of policies they have. But I think what already happened is there are many, many people, like 10,000 of them, who are actually impacted with their life, and they actually escape into the border of Thailand. And as far as I know, so the supplies for like food or like public health is very difficult to get to them. And sometimes just not talking about like helping it. I think what we have to promote is just not just like helping people in Myanmar, but even with refugees around our border, the help that we can send to them immediately. I think this should be one of the priorities where the Thai enterprise could lend a hand to. So, Ms. Vicky, please.
Thank you. I mean, first of all, I do think Thailand has been incredibly generous over the decades in terms of hosting the refugee population. And although, you know, the sort of regularization of that has been challenging, I do think we should recognize what has been done by the government of Thailand successively in terms of hosting people, including today. But I should also add that we, from sitting in Myanmar, we used to look at Thailand post-coup and think it's one of the biggest beneficiaries, because Thailand has had a huge number of very wealthy, educated, skilled people who've gone to live in Bangkok and Chiang Mai, who are putting their kids into Thai private schools. So actually, you've done pretty well out of it. And I think the Thai real estate market has also been benefiting from Myanmar investment. Now, some of that may be bad black money, but a lot of it is more that people see that currently they don't want to invest in Myanmar, so they're investing in, you know, property in Thailand, or even beyond that elsewhere in the region. So, you know, Thailand is not purely a loser out of this conflict. I think it's really gained a lot of very positive refugee influxes who are contributing to academia and to the private sector. In terms of what consumers should do, I think it's really important that any campaign does exactly what it's telling businesses to do. In other words, do a human rights impact assessment with a conflict analysis. You really got to understand what are the consequences of what you're calling for. And you've got to understand how the different, you know, aspects, for example, exile versus internal and so on, play out in the debates which are going on. and you need to be careful what you wish for, as they say, because you can end up with a worse outcome by, for example, pressurizing a company to leave than if that company had stayed but been pressurized to be more specifically, mitigating its human rights impacts in another way. So you've really got to do that assessment either as a civil society organization or individually, or as an investor for that matter, and ask well-informed questions and challenge and push, but make sure that you're not just taking a stance which is virtue signaling, which is just saying Myanmar bad, because that then condemns 55 million people in the country to the impacts of, for example, the withdrawal of your employment. So that would be what I would say is do think through the impacts of what you're calling for. Some campaigns absolutely sensible. Some of them actually at the end of it, people go, oh, that wasn't what we expected to happen. Well, that is what the consequence is of what you were calling for. Thank you.
ค่ะเห็นคุณสรินีขยับเปิดกล้องมาอาจจะอยาก
So I saw Sarinee open the camera. Maybe she has a comment. So on behalf of being the host, I really like to thank you, Vicky Bowman and Professor Lalita Hanwong. So us as a Fair Finance, we're very excited and we wanting to organize these events for a year already. And as we work for banks, right, we want to engage them into thinking about these issues. And I agree with both of you said that the Thai business and Thai banks should play more role in requiring business that work or operates in Myanmar to do the assessment, the risk assessment, the conflict assessments, or as the and we have the due diligence tools that you have done, like heightened human rights due diligence handbook, right? Which is a tools that can help assess the high risk area in Myanmar. So when the business go there, you have to do those as kind of assessment. So I think that's very beneficial. Thank you, Professor Lalita, for giving us on historical background. I think the audience here learn more about the history. And I agree with Professor Lalita that human rights issues is something that business should not overlook. And after I listened to both Kun Vicky and both Kun Lalita, whether like Thai banks or Thai businesses, I think they should be more specific. So they should not do direct business with the military group. Would be different from doing business with trading with just regular citizens. So it's very important to be specific about the business, and there's complexity in there, there's differences in there. So as Kun Vicky has said, that we do not be a part in allowing better business to be in that area and not allowing worse business to take over. So I think how to show that Thai people is actually side with Myanmar, and we do not think that they bad, and we think that we help them and we support them. So there are many campaigns from Fair Finance as well that we want to push forward, like transparencies or following the due diligence on human rights and look at the risks more than in the past. So thank you very much. And I have always been following up with the work of Fair Finance, and I understand that consumers have become more considerate about using business from Thai banks or Thai business. They pay more attention about human rights as well. So on behalf of Fair Finance Thailand and Myanmar Center for Responsible Business, we have to thank two speakers. Professor Lalita Hanwong from the Department of History from Kasetsart University, and Kun Vicky Bowman, who is the co-host as well and the director of Myanmar Center for Responsible Business. So we really have to thank all the audience here who are in the Zoom and watching live to both Thai and English channel. So we'll say goodbye for today, and we'll see you next time in the next event from Fair Finance. Thank you both of you again. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Kokonaka. Thank you.